It started with the scent of a perfume I didn't recognize and ended with the complete implosion of my world. For 25 years, I was a husband, a son, a father, a good man, I thought. I built a life brick by boring, dependable brick. Then one Tuesday afternoon, a single text message on my wife's iPad turned that life into a pile of rubble. The betrayal was a knife to the gut, but the identity of the man she was sleeping with, that was a special kind of poison, a twist so vile it felt like something out of a Greek tragedy. You think you know how this story of the cheating wife ends, with screaming matches, bitter divorces, and lonely nights, but what I uncovered next changed everything. The truth wasn't just about a broken marriage, it was about a lifetime of lies. Before we dive into the wreckage, hit that subscribe button and comment below. Have you ever dealt with betrayal? I need to know I'm not alone in this. Let's hear your stories. Part 1, The Scent of a Lie. Life at 48 had settled into a comfortable rhythm. It wasn't a symphony, more like the steady, predictable hum of a well-maintained refrigerator. I was David, an IT project manager, a guy who found satisfaction in clean code and resolved tickets. My wife, Sarah, was the vibrant, chaotic color in my monochrome world. We had a beautiful daughter, Emily, who was off finding herself at a college a few states away, leaving us in the quiet echo of our suburban home in Ohio. The house felt too big now, the silence too loud, but this was the dream, right? The mortgage was manageable, my 401k was healthy, and my marriage was a 25-year-old institution. I thought it was built to last. The first crack was almost imperceptible. It was a scent. Sarah came home one evening from her new book club, smelling of something floral and musky, a fragrance I'd never known her to wear. She was a die-hard Chanel no. 5 loyalist, a scent so intertwined with my memory of her that I could probably pick it out of a police lineup. New perfume? I asked, looking up from my laptop at the kitchen island. She froze for a microsecond, her smile just a little too bright. Oh, this, one of the girls, Brenda, had a sample. It's called Midnight Bloom or something dramatic like that. A bit much, don't you think? She waved a dismissive hand and breezed past me, the foreign scent trailing in her wake. I shrugged it off. Women tried new things, no big deal. But Midnight Bloom started making regular appearances, always on Tuesday and Thursday nights, book club nights. Then came the phone habits. Her phone, once a communal device left casually on the counter, was now permanently attached to her hip. It was always angled away from me, and the screen would go dark the moment I walked into the room. She'd laugh at texts, and when I'd ask what was funny, she'd wave that same dismissive hand. Oh, just Brenda being ridiculous about her husband again. Poor guy can't even load the dishwasher right. The irony was thicker than Ohio humidity. I was the guy who always loaded the dishwasher right. I handled the bills, I mowed the lawn, I fixed the leaky faucet under the sink while she was at her yoga retreat weekend. I'd sacrificed a promotion years ago that would have required us to move because she didn't want to leave her aging parents. I did it without a second thought. That's what a husband did. You provided, you protected, you stayed. Our intimacy had changed too. It had become efficient, perfunctory. The slow, languid passion of our youth had been replaced by a scheduled encounter that felt more like a checklist item before sleep. I'd tried to initiate something more to recapture that spark, but she'd often plead exhaustion or a headache. Long day, honey, she'd sigh, rolling over. Yet on book club nights, she'd come home energized, her eyes sparkling, practically vibrating with a secret energy. I'm not a complete idiot, but I am, admittedly, an optimist, or maybe I was just willfully blind. The thought that Sarah, my Sarah, the girl I'd met in a college library and fallen for over dusty textbooks, could be unfaithful felt like suggesting the sun might rise in the west. It was a violation of the fundamental laws of my universe, so I explained it all away. She was in her mid-40s, our daughter was gone, she was probably just having a small midlife crisis, trying to find a new identity outside of being a mom. The new perfume, the secretive texts, the distance, it was a phase. We'd get through it. One Saturday, I tried to bridge the growing chasm. I booked a table at our favorite Italian place, the one where I proposed. I bought her a new dress. She looked stunning, but her smile never quite reached her eyes. You're quiet tonight, I said, swirling the Chianti in my glass. Just tired, she replied, her gaze fixed on something over my shoulder. Thinking about my dad, Her father had passed away 5 years ago. My own mother had died a decade before that, leaving my dad, Frank, a widower. He was a force of nature, my father. A retired sales executive, he was all charisma and booming laughter, the kind of guy who could sell a ketchup popsicle to a woman in white gloves. He was 72, but had the energy of a man 20 years younger. Since my mom died, Sarah had taken him under her wing, making sure he was eating right, helping with his finances. I thought it was sweet. "How's he doing?" I asked. "He's good, keeping busy." "He's been such a rock for me lately," she said, a strange intensity in her voice. "He just gets it." Gets what? The boredom, the quiet desperation of a life that had turned out exactly as planned. I didn't ask. The truth is, I was afraid of the answer. That night, lying in bed next to her, the space between us felt like a mile-wide canyon. I could still smell midnight bloom faintly on her skin from 2 nights prior, a ghostly reminder that a part of her life was now completely foreign to me. I told myself I was being paranoid, a cliché of a middle-aged husband. But in the dark, a cold seed of doubt had been planted, and it was starting to grow. Part 2, The Ghost in the Machine. The discovery didn't happen in a seedy motel parking lot or with a lipstick-stained collar. It happened on a quiet Tuesday afternoon in the sunlit sanctuary of my own home office. It was mundane, technical, and for that reason, all the more brutal. Sarah had been complaining for weeks that her laptop was running slow. "It takes forever to load my recipes," she'd said. "Can you work your magic, honey?" I was the family IT guy, the digital janitor. I took the laptop to my office, happy to have a concrete problem to solve. As I ran a diagnostic, I noticed her email and social media accounts were still logged in. I wasn't a snoop. Privacy was a cornerstone of our trust. But as I went to close the browser, a notification banner slid down from the top right corner of the screen. It was from a messaging app I didn't recognize. The preview showed a name and a line of text. "Frank, can't stop thinking about last night. You wear that perfume just for me." My blood went cold. "Frank, it can't be," I thought, my heart starting to hammer against my ribs like a trapped bird. There are a million Franks in the world. Maybe it was Frank from her old office, Frank from the garden club. It had to be a coincidence. My father, a recent and proud Luddite, barely knew how to use the TV remote. He texted with one finger, using bizarre abbreviations he thought the kids used. He wasn't sending messages like that, but the seed of doubt, now watered with pure adrenaline, sprouted into a monstrous weed. My hands trembled as I clicked on the notification. It opened a chat window filled with a history that stretched back months. My eyes scanned the messages, my brain struggling to process the words. They were intimate, filled with inside jokes, flirtatious banter, and logistical details for their meetups. Tuesdays and Thursdays, book club. I felt a wave of nausea so profound I had to grip the edge of my desk. My world tilted on its axis. I was reading a love affair unfold, a secret history written in glowing pixels. I saw messages from Sarah talking about my obliviousness. "Sarah, he has no idea. He's so wrapped up in his work. Sometimes I think he wouldn't notice if I was gone for a week. Frank, his loss is my gain, beautiful. He never knew how to appreciate a masterpiece. A masterpiece. My father called my wife a masterpiece. The bile rose in my throat. I scrolled up desperately, needing more proof, needing something to tell me this was an elaborate, sick prank. And then I found it. A hidden folder in her cloud storage, password protected, but I had set up her account years ago. I knew her standard password, our daughter's birthday. The folder opened. It was a photo album, and the first picture ripped the air from my lungs. It was Sarah laughing, draped in a hotel bathrobe, not from a spa weekend, with a man's arm around her. The man was older, his hand marked by the familiar liver spots and the gold signet ring I would recognize anywhere. It was my father's hand. The next photo was a selfie of the two of them, smiling, my father's face radiating a smug satisfaction that I now recognized as predatory. He was kissing her on the cheek, my wife, my father. The room began to spin. Every shared family dinner, every holiday, every time he'd clapped me on the back and called me son, every time she'd hugged him and called him dad, it all replayed in my mind, now tainted, grotesque. His paternal advice to me about keeping the spark alive in a marriage felt like a cruel joke. Her complaints about me being distant felt like manufactured justifications. They weren't just cheating, they were desecrating a family. My family, my entire life felt like a sham, a carefully constructed stage play where I was the only one who didn't know his lines. I was the fool, the hardworking, loyal, oblivious fool. I closed the laptop, my movements stiff and robotic. I walked to the bathroom and stared at my reflection. The face looking back at me was a stranger, pale, his eyes wide with a horror so deep it felt bottomless. The man in the mirror was a cuckold, betrayed by the two people on earth he was supposed to trust implicitly. The initial shock was a physical blow, a punch to the solar plexus that left me breathless. But as the seconds ticked by, something else began to bubble up from the depths, something hot and acidic. It was rage. A pure, unadulterated fury unlike anything I had ever felt before. It was a fire that burned away the shock and the pain, leaving behind a cold, hard resolve. They thought I was a fool. They thought I wouldn't notice. They were about to find out just how wrong they were. Part 3, A Walk Through the Wreckage. The hours after the discovery were a blur of disembodied motion. I remember putting the laptop back on the kitchen counter exactly where I'd found it. I remember walking out the front door and just driving, with no destination in mind, the suburban streets of our life blurring into a meaningless smear of green lawns and picket fences. My mind was a war zone. On one side was the searing image from the laptop, my wife and my father, their faces flushed with a secret intimacy. On the other side were 25 years of memories, now poisoned at the root. I saw Sarah on our wedding day, her eyes shining with what I had believed was pure, unadulterated love for me. I saw my father holding my infant daughter, Emily, in his arms, telling me, "You're a good man, David. You'll be a great father." Were they all lies? Was this sick betrayal something new, a product of late-life boredom and narcissism, or had its shadow been lurking in the corners of my life all along? My thoughts spiraled into a vortex of self-doubt. Was it my fault? The messages from Sarah echoed in my head. He's so wrapped up in his work. He has no idea. Had I been that absent, I'd worked hard, yes, but I did it for us. For the house, for Emily's college fund, for the comfortable life Sarah seemed to enjoy. I thought that was my job. I thought that was what love looked like at this stage, a quiet partnership built on shared responsibilities and mutual respect. I hadn't realized she was looking for a standing ovation. I pulled into a rest stop, the engine ticking as it cooled. I leaned my head against the steering wheel, the plastic cool against my feverish skin. Flashbacks, sharp and unwanted, assaulted me. I remembered a night maybe a year ago when Sarah and I had made love. It had felt different, desperate almost. She was fiercely passionate, almost aggressive, in a way she hadn't been for years. At the time, I'd been thrilled, thinking we'd finally broken through a dry spell. Now, the memory felt disgusting. Was she thinking of him? Was she practicing moves on me that she'd learned with my own father? The thought made me want to vomit. I had to choose a path. The primal, reptilian part of my brain screamed for immediate, violent confrontation. Kick down the door, throw her things on the lawn, drive to my father's house and smash everything he held dear. The public humiliation, the screaming, the raw, unfiltered release of this volcanic rage. But then a colder, more calculating part of me took over. What would that accomplish? They'd play the victims. Sarah would cry and say I was being hysterical. My father, the master salesman, would spin some story, gaslight me, and turn the situation around. They would control the narrative. I had the truth, but the truth, I was quickly realizing, was a weapon. And weapons needed to be wielded with precision, not swung wildly in a fit of rage. An ironic thought surfaced, a flicker of dark humor in the abyss. I was a project manager. My entire career was about strategy, planning, and flawless execution. This was the ultimate project, Project Annihilation. The goal wasn't just to expose them. It was to dismantle their lives with the same methodical care they used to dismantle mine. I wouldn't just win, I would script their downfall. The internal debate raged. What if I was wrong? Could there be some other explanation? The thought died as soon as it was born, the pictures, the texts. His loss is my gain, beautiful. No, there was no misunderstanding. This was real. As dusk settled, painting the Ohio sky in shades of bruised purple and orange, I made my decision. I would not be the weeping victim. I would not be the raging bull. I would become a ghost in my own life, a silent observer gathering the data I needed. I would play the part of the oblivious, hardworking husband they believed me to be, and when the time was right, I would present my findings. Not with a shout, but with a quiet, devastatingly precise detonation that would leave no room for excuses or escape. The fire of my rage wouldn't be a wildfire, it would be a controlled burn, and I would be the one holding the torch. I drove home, a strange calm settling over me. The grief was still there, a heavy stone in my gut, but it now had a purpose. It was fuel. Part 4, the Gaslight Duet. Returning home that evening was like walking onto a stage set. Every object, the photos on the mantelpiece, the half-finished crossword on the coffee table, the jacket Sarah had left draped over a chair, felt like a prop in a play about a happy marriage. A play where I was the only one who now knew the script was a work of fiction. Sarah was in the kitchen, humming along to some pop song on the radio. She turned as I walked in, a bright, practiced smile on her face. "Hey, honey. You were gone a while, everything okay? Just had to clear my head after a long day," I said, my voice unnervously steady. It was shockingly easy to lie when the truth was no longer a currency between us. Traffic was a beast. "Tell me about it," she sighed, stirring a pot on the stove. "I was on the phone with your dad earlier. He said the I-71 was a parking lot." The casual, effortless way she dropped his name into the conversation sent a jolt of ice through my veins. It was a test, a way to gauge my reaction, to normalize their connection in the open. I met her gaze, keeping my expression neutral. "Oh yeah, what's he up to?" "Oh, the usual," she said, waving her spoon. "Complaining about his golf swing, bragging about his tomatoes. He wants us all to come over for his birthday dinner in a few weeks, a big family thing. He's turning 73, you know." Her performance was flawless. She was the caring daughter-in-law, the dutiful wife. I felt a surge of something akin to admiration for her audacity, quickly followed by a wave of disgust. They were so confident, so arrogant in their deceit. I agreed to the birthday dinner, of course. It was perfect. A stage of their own choosing for a final act of my design. In the days that followed, I became an actor in my own life. I was attentive, but not too attentive. I asked about her day, about her book club, listening to her intricate lies about plot twists in novels she'd never read and the mundane dramas of women she barely saw. Each lie was a piece of data, another brick in the wall of evidence I was building. I decided to gently probe, to test the limits of their deception. One evening, as we were watching TV, I casually remarked, "You know, it's really great how much time you spend with Dad. He must get lonely in that big house by himself. You're a good daughter-in-law." She stiffened for a fraction of a second, her eyes darting toward me before focusing back on the screen. "Well, he's family, David. After all he's been through, losing your mom, it's the least I can do. He's been a huge support for me, too." "Support with what?" I asked, feigning innocent curiosity. This is where the gaslighting began in earnest. "You know," she said, her tone shifting, a note of defensiveness creeping in. "With Emily gone, the house feeling so empty, you being so busy with work all the time. Sometimes it feels like you're a million miles away even when you're sitting right next to me. Your dad, he listens, he gets it." It was a masterstroke of manipulation. In one breath, she justified her affair, blamed me for it, and painted my own father as her emotional savior. It was so perfectly constructed to make me feel guilty and inadequate that the old me, the me from last week, would have apologized. I would have promised to do better, to be more present, but the new me just nodded slowly, filing it away. "I'm sorry you feel that way," I said, the words tasting like ash. "I've just been trying to provide for us." Her phone became my primary source of intel. I didn't need to break into it again. I simply watched. She guarded it like a dragon guards its gold. She'd take calls in the other room, her voice a low murmur. Once I walked into the kitchen while she was on the phone and I heard her say, "No, he's right here." "I'll call you back later, honey." She hung up abruptly, a flush creeping up her neck. "Who was that?" I asked. "Brenda," she snapped, her voice sharp. "God, you're so nosy lately. Can't a person have a private conversation?" I held up my hands in mock surrender. "Sorry, just getting a glass of water." The accusation of me being nosy or paranoid became her go-to defense. It was a classic deflection tactic. The more I retreated into my quiet observation, the more she seemed to interpret it as suspicion, which in turn justified her secrecy. It was a perverse, self-fulfilling prophecy of her own making. The defiance wasn't just hers. I called my father a few days later under the pretense of checking in. He was his usual booming, charismatic self. "David, my boy, how's my favorite son?" I'm your only son, Dad, I said, the words feeling hollow. He laughed his big salesman laugh. Details, details. Listen, your wife was telling me you've been a bit down in the dumps lately. Burning the candle at both ends, eh? You gotta learn to relax, son. Take that beautiful woman of yours out on the town. She's a prize, that one, don't you ever forget it. The sheer, unmitigated gall of it left me speechless. He was coaching me on how to be a better husband to the woman he was sleeping with. He was using his paternal authority as a cover, a shield of righteousness. This wasn't just a betrayal, it was a power play of the highest order. He saw me not as his son, but as his competition, a competition he had already won. I ended the call, my hand shaking with a rage so cold it felt like my blood had turned to ice. They weren't just cheating, they were enjoying it. They were reveling in their secret, mocking my ignorance, and performing their duet of gaslighting and denial with theatrical flair. They thought they were in control. They had no idea they were just actors, and I was now the director. The final scene was approaching, and it wasn't going to be the one they had rehearsed. Part 5, Forging an Unlikely Alliance. Playing the fool is an exhausting business. Every shared meal was a performance, every conversation a minefield. The constant vigilance was grinding me down. I was sleeping in the guest room, claiming a bad back from a weekend of yard work, just to have a few hours of reprieve from lying next to her, smelling her lies. I needed an outlet. I needed an ally. The thought of telling a friend seemed impossible. How do you even begin that conversation? Hey, Bob, you'll never guess what's up. My wife is cheating on me with my dad. It sounded like a bad punchline to a dirty joke. It would invite pity, disgust, and the kind of awkwardness that fractures friendships forever. Then I thought of my sister, Karen. Karen was 2 years younger than me, a sharp, no-nonsense divorce attorney living in Chicago. Our relationship was solid, built on a lifetime of shared eye rolls at our father's grandstanding and a mutual, unspoken understanding of his flaws. While I had always chosen to see our dad, Frank, through a lens of filial duty and nostalgia for the good times, Karen had always seen him with the clear, unflinching eye of a prosecutor. She loved him, but she didn't trust him. She called his charm a tool and his charisma a weapon. I called her on a Wednesday night, my voice tight with a tension I couldn't hide. Hey, Karen, got a minute? For my big brother, always, she said. Her voice was warm, but she immediately picked up on my tone. What's wrong, Dave? You sound like you just found a body. Something like that, I mumbled. Listen, I need to talk to you about Dad and Sarah. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Okay, she said slowly, the professional caution in her voice now evident. Are they okay? They're fine, I said, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. They're more than fine. They're together, together. What do you mean together? Like working on a project? I took a deep breath. No, Karen, not like that. Like together, together, sleeping together, having an affair. Silence. For a full 10 seconds, the only sound was the faint hiss of the phone line. I could picture her on the other end, her face hardening, her legal mind processing the accusation, weighing its validity. Tell me everything, she finally said, her voice devoid of emotion. It was her lawyer voice. And don't leave out a single detail, so I told her. I told her about the perfume, the texts, the secret photo album, the gaslighting, the phone calls. I laid out the evidence piece by piece, as if I were presenting a case. As I spoke, the shame and confusion I felt began to recede, replaced by a sense of clarity. Saying it out loud made it real, concrete, and undeniable. When I finished, Karen let out a long, slow breath. There was no shock or disbelief in her voice. There was only a weary, cold anger. That son of a bitch, she whispered. I always knew he was a narcissist, but this is a new level of depravity. And Sarah, God, Dave, I'm so sorry. Don't be sorry, I said, my own voice hardening. Be angry, I need you to be angry with me. Oh, I'm past angry, she replied, her voice like flint. I'm incandescent. What's your plan? That was my sister. No hand-wringing, no platitudes, just strategy. I told her about my idea for the birthday dinner, the public reveal. I explained my goal, not just to expose them, but to ensure I was protected legally and financially. Good, she said, the strategist in her kicking into high gear. That's a powerful move, but you need to be smart. You need irrefutable proof, and you need to document everything. Dates, times, screenshots, start a journal. And you need to check your finances now, all of them, joint accounts, credit cards, his will, everything. His will? I asked, confused. Dad is charming, but he's also manipulative, she explained. Sarah's been helping him with his finances, right? You don't think she'd convince a lonely, infatuated old man to change his will in her favor. You need to assume the worst, Dave. In my line of work, I've learned that people are capable of anything when they think they can get away with it. Her words were a splash of cold water. I had been so focused on the emotional betrayal that I hadn't even considered the financial implications. The deception might run deeper than I ever imagined. Okay, I said, my resolve solidifying. Okay, I can do that. You're not alone in this, she said, her voice softening for the first time. I've got your back. I'll start looking for the best divorce attorney in Ohio. We're going to handle this properly. We're going to burn them to the ground, but we're going to do it with legal precision. Hanging up the phone, I felt like I could breathe for the first time in a week. The crushing weight of the secret had been halved. I had an ally, someone who saw the situation not as a messy family drama, but as a battle to be won. Corinne's cold fury was a mirror of my own, and her practical, legalistic approach gave my quest for revenge a new, sharper edge. The dark thrill I'd felt earlier returned, but it was different now. It wasn't just about vengeance anymore. It was about justice. My sister and I, the two children of the great Frank Miller, were about to bring the showman's final act to a devastating close. Part 6, The Birthday Dinner. The 2 weeks leading up to my father's 73rd birthday were the longest of my life. I lived a dual existence. On the surface, I was David Miller, dutiful son and husband, helping to plan the party, fielding calls from relatives. Underneath, I was a saboteur, meticulously preparing my detonation. Following Corinne's advice, I became a forensic accountant of my own life. I discovered that Sarah had a secret credit card, a joint account with my father, disguised under a generic business name. They had funded their trysts with money from his retirement fund, weekends at boutique hotels, expensive dinners, gifts. The Midnight Bloom perfume had been a present from him. The depth of the financial deceit was staggering. He wasn't just my romantic rival, he was my wife's benefactor. I documented everything, creating a digital folder on a secure drive, a veritable museum of their treachery. Screenshots, bank statements, even a short audio recording I'd managed to capture on my phone one night when Sarah took a call in the garage, her voice cooing, "I miss you too, I can't wait to see you." The night of the party arrived. It was a classic Frank Miller affair. He had insisted on hosting it at his house, a sprawling ranch-style home filled with photos of a seemingly happy family. My family. About 20 people were there, aunts, uncles, cousins, and a few of his old friends. Emily had even driven in from college as a surprise, a fact that twisted the knife in my gut even further. Her bright, innocent face was a stark contrast to the sordid drama about to unfold. Sarah was glowing. She wore a new red dress, a dress I now knew my father had bought for her. She played the perfect hostess and daughter-in-law, flitting around, making sure everyone had a drink, laughing at my father's tired old jokes. He was in his element, the patriarch, the center of attention, holding court in his favorite armchair. He and Sarah exchanged subtle glances, little sparks of shared secrecy that were invisible to everyone but me. To me, they were like neon signs. I moved through the evening like a ghost, a polite smile plastered on my face. I hugged my aunts, I talked sports with my cousins, I helped Emily bring out the cake. Every touch, every word felt like a lie. Finally, the moment came. After the cake was cut and the off-key rendition of Happy Birthday was sung, my father stood up, glass in hand, to make a speech. He thanked everyone for coming, his voice booming with practiced sincerity. Then he looked at Sarah, a warm, proprietary smile on his face. "And I especially want to thank my wonderful daughter-in-law, Sarah," he said, raising his glass to her. "Since my dear Martha passed, this house has been so quiet. Sarah has brought light and laughter back into my life. She takes such wonderful care of me. She's more like a daughter to me than a daughter-in-law." The room filled with appreciative awes. Sarah blushed, lapping up the praise. I felt the rage, cold and pure, solidify in my chest. "More like a daughter," the audacity was breathtaking. He then turned to me. "And to my son, David, you're a lucky man, a very lucky man." That was my cue. I stood up, holding my own glass. "Hear, hear," I said, my voice ringing out with a confidence that surprised even me. I'd actually like to propose a toast of my own, to my father, a man of many hidden talents. I pulled my phone out of my pocket. In fact, I put together a little slideshow of some of my favorite family memories in honor of his big day. I think you'll all enjoy it. With a few taps, I connected my phone to his brand new 65-inch smart TV hanging over the fireplace. The guests murmured in appreciation. Sarah looked at me, a flicker of something, confusion, suspicion, in her eyes. The slideshow began innocently enough. Pictures of me and Karen as kids, photos from my wedding. Holidays, vacations, graduations. Emily's smiling face flashed on the screen, and I felt a pang of guilt for what I was about to do to her, but it was too late to turn back. This poison had to be lanced. Then the music I'd chosen, a jaunty, upbeat instrumental, faded. The screen went black for a second, and then a new image appeared. It was a screenshot of a text message, blown up to fill the entire screen. Frank, can't stop thinking about last night. You wear that perfume just for me. A confused silence fell over the room. People squinted at the screen. I saw my Uncle Mark lean forward. What the hell is this? Before anyone could fully process it, the next image flashed up. Sarah, he has no idea. He's so wrapped up in his work. Then another. Frank, his loss is my gain, beautiful. He never knew how to appreciate a masterpiece. A gasp rippled through the room. I looked at Sarah. The color had drained from her face. Her mouth was a perfect O of horror. She looked at my father, her eyes wide with panic. He was frozen, his celebratory smile locked on his face in a grotesque death mask. Then came the finale, not the most graphic photo, but the most damning. It was the selfie from the hotel room. My father, smug and triumphant, kissing the cheek of my smiling, adoring wife. The silence that followed was absolute, a crushing, heavy void. It was broken by a single, choked sob. It was Emily. Her face was a mask of utter devastation and disbelief as she stared from the screen to her mother, then to her grandfather. My father was the first to speak, his voice a hoarse whisper. David, what is this? This is some kind of sick joke. I turned to face him, my expression utterly serene. Is it, Dad? I asked, my voice calm and clear. You tell me. Is it a joke, or is it a receipt from the hotel in Columbus from 2 weeks ago? Or the credit card statements for the jewelry you bought her? I have those, too. I have everything. Sarah finally found her voice. David, don't, she pleaded, tears streaming down her face. Please, not like this. Like what, Sarah? I shot back, the dam of my composure finally breaking. You mean not in front of the whole family whose trust you've been betraying for over a year? With him, my father, I gestured to the shell-shocked man in the armchair. You didn't seem to mind being discreet then. Why start now? The room erupted. My sister Karen was already by Emily's side, shielding her, while my aunts and uncles stared, their faces a mixture of shock, disgust, and dawning comprehension. The party was over. The family, as we knew it, was over. I had pressed the button, and the fallout was going to be glorious. Part 7, Paths to Resolution. The aftermath of the birthday dinner was exactly what you'd expect, pure, unadulterated chaos. My father sputtered denials that quickly crumbled into pathetic excuses about loneliness. Sarah dissolved into a storm of tears and accusations, blaming me for the public humiliation, as if the method of discovery was the real crime, not the betrayal itself. My relatives, caught in the crossfire, either fled in horrified silence or began shouting. It was ugly, operatic, and in a strange, detached way, deeply satisfying. I didn't stay for the finale. With Karen at my side, I took a devastated Emily and left the house, leaving Sarah and my father to drown in the wreckage they had created. That night, for the first time in what felt like an eternity, I slept. It wasn't a peaceful sleep, but it was the deep, dreamless sleep of an exhausted soldier after a decisive battle. The days that followed were a blur of legal meetings and painful conversations. Karen had, as promised, found me a shark of a divorce lawyer, armed with my mountain of evidence, the financial records being the proverbial nail in the coffin. The legal proceedings were swift and brutal. Sarah, stripped of her victim narrative, tried a different tactic: remorse. She left me dozens of tearful voicemails, begging for forgiveness, claiming she was confused and manipulated by my father's attention. He made me feel seen, she cried in one message. You were never there, David. I listened to them, not with anger, but with a kind of clinical detachment. Perhaps there was a sliver of truth there. Maybe I had been a distant husband. But in my mind, that was a misdemeanor. What she had done was a capital crime. It was a line that could never be uncrossed. I never returned her calls. The divorce was finalized in under 6 months. Thanks to the evidence of adultery and financial infidelity, the settlement was heavily in my favor. I got the house, the majority of our shared assets, and my freedom. Sarah was left with a fraction of our savings and the tarnished reputation she had earned. My father tried a different approach, paternal disappointment. He called me once, his voice heavy with faux gravitas. "I don't know what I ever did to raise a son so full of hate," he said. "To destroy your own family for a moment of revenge, it's a sad thing, David, a sad, sad thing." I laughed, a real, genuine laugh. "You want to talk about destroying a family, Dad?" I asked. "Look in the mirror. You just couldn't stand not being the main character, could you? Not even in your own son's life. You didn't just sleep with my wife, you tried to take my place. Goodbye, Frank." I hung up and blocked his number. I haven't spoken to him since. I hear through my sister that he's a lonely man now, his social circle having evaporated in the heat of the scandal. A fitting end for a man who thrived on an audience. The most difficult path was with Emily. My public detonation had inadvertently made her collateral damage. For weeks, she was angry with everyone, with Sarah and Frank for their betrayal, but also with me for the brutal way I exposed it. "You could have just told me," she said one night, her eyes red from crying. "You didn't have to blow everything up like that." "I know," I admitted, the first crack in my armor of righteous anger. "And I'm sorry for the pain it caused you. But they built a house of lies. Sometimes the only way to deal with a structure that rotten is to tear it down to the foundation." It took time, but we rebuilt. Our bond, forged in the fire of this shared trauma, became stronger than ever. We talked, really talked, for the first time in years. I told her about my pain, my rage, and my regrets. She told me about her feelings of betrayal and her confusion. We found our way back to each other, not as a perfect father and daughter, but as two flawed human beings navigating an impossible situation. A year has passed. The house is quieter now, but it's a peaceful quiet, not the tense, heavy silence of before. I sold the house my father lived in, my childhood home, which my mother had left to both me and Karen. We split the proceeds, severing the last financial tie. I took my share and bought a small condo downtown. I rediscovered old hobbies, started hiking on the weekends, and reconnected with friends I'd let drift away. I started to rediscover David, the man, not just David, the husband and son. I'm not a vengeful man by nature, but I don't feel guilt for what I did. I feel a sense of catharsis, of justice. They made their choices, and I simply presented them with the consequences. Sometimes I reflect on alternate paths. What if I had confronted them quietly? What if we'd tried therapy? Would it have led to a different, less painful outcome? I honestly don't think so. The betrayal was too fundamental, too monstrous. A quiet divorce would have allowed them to control the narrative, to paint me as the cold, distant husband who drove his poor wife into the arms of a sympathetic father-in-law. It would have been another lie, and I was done with lies. Last week I went on a date. She's a history professor, funny and intelligent, with kind eyes. We talked for hours. For the first time, I felt a spark of something new, a future I hadn't dared to imagine. I am 49 years old, and in many ways, my life is just beginning. The old one had to burn to the ground for this new one to grow, and from the ashes, I am slowly but surely rebuilding. If this story hit home, like and subscribe for more gripping tales of love and betrayal. The path I chose was brutal, but it was mine. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Would you forgive or seek revenge? There's no right answer, but I'm curious to hear what you would have done. Check out the next video popping up now for another twist-filled saga. And remember, sometimes the only way out is through.